Well, welcome once again to another edition of the Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett. I am, of course, your host, Sonia Barrett, and thank you for joining me. There's so much that can always be said about this moment in time, but I think this quote sort of sums up, I think, quite a bit here. And this quote is, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process, he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." And that's by Friedrich Nietzsche. Yeah, Nietzsche. And I really like that quote because, especially for today's world, because of the anger that we sort of have with each other. And so we can easily become the very thing that we abhor. You can see how each of us, it's very easy to fall into that. You're angry with somebody else for what they're doing, but at the same time, you have to take a look at your response, in that anger. And it's just back and forth anyway. So I just thought that that was definitely a great quote, something that we really should keep in mind, something we need to remember as we navigate this paradigm at this point until it all shifts. Well, today's topic is the hieroglyph of the human soul. What does this all mean? And the guest to discuss this, based on his work, is Leigh McCloskey, artist, author, and well-known actor and visual philosopher. So Leigh J McCloskey is modern Renaissance man. He is an artist, author, well-known actor, and visual philosopher. His highly creative life has been devoted to exploring the symbolical, archetypal, and hidden aspects of the psyche and inner self through his art, scholarship, books, and experiences as a professional actor for many years. He has hosted weekly discussion groups in his house, Oleander, for over 39 years. His deep knowledge ranges from arcane wisdom, religion, depth psychology, and quantum physics to the mythic imagination and the creation of art. He is the founder of Oleander Foundation for Emerging Renaissance and gives regular tours of his art and home. He has written, illustrated, and published 7 books, including his masterpiece of art and writing, Tarot Revisioned, reviewed as possibly the most significant contribution to the tradition in over 100 years. Leigh is also a well-known actor who has starred in many television shows and movies, including Dallas and a number of daytime dramas such as General Hospital in Santa Barbara. On 9/11 in 2001, he began painting the floor of his home library studio. The hieroglyph of the human soul was actually born. It is in 3D and has grown to cover the walls, ceilings, furniture, and books, creating a fully immersive, mythic, domestic environment that tells the story through art of the deeper purpose and meaning of the human pilgrimage and finding our way home together. Welcome, Leigh McCloskey, to the Expansion Zone.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm delighted to be with you.
So good to have you here, really. Just having experienced the home and had the opportunity to engage in the dialogue, these deep and meaningful dialogues that happen in your home. It's so energizing. So I'm thrilled to have you here. So I think that what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with this. I love the fact that, all human beings have a story. We all have a point, a memorable point, a turning point as to when we probably became extremely curious, more deeply curious, or for some of us, we were just born that way. But then at some point, life sort of triggers you to really take this journey down the rabbit hole of discovery. So with all that you've done, so I'm curious as to, is there a memorable turning point in your life, during your career or otherwise, where you said, you know what? I'm curious. And I'm not speaking about the masterpiece you've done yet, but I'm talking that moment of
I
deep
was,
questioning.
yeah, I was very fortunate because I grew up in a family that honored creativity, was interested in imagination, and curiosity was cultivated. So it was very normal for me and I thought everyone was given the same opportunity, only to grow into a world to realize really it's more rare than common, seemingly, that these qualities are given place or given value or given meaning. And it's an interesting question because everything that was transformation in my life, in one way or another, had to do with, in a way, compensating for trauma. Meaning, how does one make sense? Like I had a very, I was really inundated by my unconscious when I was a very young teenager. Just overwhelmed me, and I had nightmares and lucid dreams, out of body experiences, and things that sleep paralysis. And so I was forced to begin to, and I didn't realize it at the time, but to cultivate tools that allowed me to navigate inner states, to begin to recognize almost that sense that I know I'm not mad, but if I don't come up with some type of tool, some type of language, I'm going to be beset by these inner furies in a way. And so that first trauma, I remember, really when I had to begin to deal with finding a way through the dark. And I started doing automatic drawing and writing. I started playing the guitar. I didn't play in front of people. I realize now that I did it as a type of almost healing meditation, meaning that, and this is important because over the years, you begin to realize that to a great degree, the more you love, the more you are alone, meaning that you're asked to have a relationship primarily with the things that you need to say. I tell people now, I say, if you write a poem and no one hears it, no one cares about it, it's not that you shouldn't care about it, it's that you should go out into nature and speak to the trees. You should speak with the creative spirit. This is what I've learned. So, there were different aha moments in my life, and at this point, so many. But one of the great things for me is that, to a certain degree, my artist side, my visual philosopher side, grew out of asking questions and realizing that every set of questions, in a way, as we know, leads to a new set of questions. But everything I was doing, like with acting, my study of archetype, my study of mythology, all of these things, and my discussion groups that you came to, were about cultivating a place, a crucible, where the ideas and thoughts that are usually overlooked because we don't have time. Well, at least here, let's honor these things. So that doesn't really ask the question, but it sort of creates at least a fullness of what's generated, certainly my art. I never set out to be an artist. My dad was an artist. So he would always say, when you can no longer talk about something, paint it. And so I always used it as a way of finding character, finding the truth, because it's connected with breath, it's connected with energy. And because I was always looking for the energy behind the optics, it grew over the years into a completely unique art. But it really does come from that art as a tool of inquiry.
Yes, no, I think you answered the question, because I think that's important, that from what you said, that you really thought that this was everybody's normal to some degree, like everybody had that same opportunity. And I get that because of all of my strangeness, I guess, as a child, and the thoughts that I had. And I just thought everybody else sort of either had that, or some specific things that I was thinking that was just way outside the box. I couldn't understand how come anybody else wasn't questioning. Does anybody else think this is weird? Like, we're here. Where is this? So, what small child is thinking that, right? and like you having the family that supported whatever it is, wherever my mind would go, makes all the difference. And I think what you said is crucial to anybody listening right now with small children, and allowing the children to have their imaginations and their expression. So no, so it made perfect sense. And writing was my way. And I had sleep paralysis. I had a lot of these things, so I get it.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's a scary thing because you have no idea what is happening.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you have no one to depend upon but yourself. You
Yep.
have to find a way to calm your energies, to breathe, to remind yourself to breathe. This is why a lot of this led to, and I know you know what I'm talking about, self as instrument. This is why my work on tarot, when I talk about it or people read my book, I spent 17 years creating essentially a piano, an instrument, not a belief system, but as you would say, a type of archetypal set of keys that when we understand, it's not fighting over which character, because we're composed of all of them, like all the books in the library. But the question is, how do we live with them? How do we put them in relationship so that we're not lived by them, but that we live? And I think that some of these very difficult things, like, let's say, sleep paralysis, the things that force one to find their own inner resource, is the beginning of cultivating a type of inner strength that will weather a world that is continuously not interested, because in a way it asks too many questions and people already have too much to deal with. So you are being cultivated. I do think that one has to begin to look at, well, why was I in this condition? And what does, in a sense, the greater organism then expect from my contribution? And I think, like you said about parents with children, I think it is to be part of that which says that this gift of being able to explore, to ask questions, is so essential. And that my key, because my question was always, well, like with the myths, well, how do you live them? What's the relevance of them? How do they fit into this world? In a sense, how do we live with these things? And that's why my work really is centered in my home. It's a domestic key that's been missing, meaning that not what's important to my neighbor, what's wrong with my neighbor, but what do I love about my children? What do I love about my home? What do I love about my cat or my dog? In other words, we start to add the equation up with not what is wrong with that, but what is here and now. And I feel like anything that cultivates a sense that we begin with intimacy, and this is the seed that must be protected. It creates a core identity that isn't looking outward, but begins to trust more greatly the inward. And many people I know that have a type of creative inner strength aren't looking for the world to support them or pat them on the head, but actually are really just looking for an opportunity to do what they love. And in that help,
Absolutely. Your personal reality. I mean, because it all spills out from there anyway. Your personal reality, because that's what you're talking about. It's like the core of your personal reality, really engaging with that, really observing that, really seeing that, because when we go outside of that, or what appears to be outside anyway, and engage with the world, you are still coming from that place. So who are you, in your space? And so Leigh, well, this is going to lead to really talking more about the art, but in terms of this moment in time, this is an opportunity. It's really what it feels like. Okay, we get it, because we're not going to get just so woo woo in our heads as people go, yeah, but these things are really happening. Okay, they are happening, but they're happening for a reason. There's nothing on the planet that just happens. So talking about it from the perspective of an opportunity to engage with that self, what do you see in terms of that aspect of what is being shown to us, or maybe nudging us or hitting us on the head?
I'll start with answering this perception of that the key is now intimate. The question is, how do you live? Not how does the neighbor live? Where are you standing? Where are your roots? Stand your ground, because you are a tree. A tree isn't trying to get somewhere else. It's trying to connect with its depth, with its roots, because in that it stands upright. It becomes strong. This is why you have totem poles. It was the idea that we grow out of the spine of our ancestors, and that they were facing the same troubles and even greater troubles than we are. And they're crying out, don't give in to the anger against the neighbor. Use the fuel. Find a way to say, at least here, let these things matter. You know, my discussion groups now go back, and I realized that it mirrored because it goes back to 81. And what I did and still do is create a space every week for individuals to gather and say, let us honor the things that inspire us, because the world seems to be growing ever more optical, meaning that it's not dealing with problems, it's using problems as a way of creating identities. And so people, in a sense, wear this great difficulty because they can't find their way home. They can't find what matters to them. And this was one of the great, because, you know, where we live, the fire, the Woolsey fire came to my door,
Right.
and we stayed. You know, and that initiation of the fire, that baptism of fire, transformed everything in terms of how I see the present moment, because it was truly apocalyptic. And it was this story inwardly of the apocalyptic nature of the present moment, and that there's a drought in the human heart, that people have forgotten what they love, knowing what they hate. And that even this sense of tell me what you hate and I'll burn down your house, meaning that we're in a time where there is a great fire and it is burning. And that in a way is a great clarity, because it says, well, what are you meant to pay attention to? And I almost feel like this is the call across the ages. Like one of the great honorings here at the library, because a lot of it is about the arts and about this, in a way, the alchemy of taking human despair and not making it about human despair, but taking the despair and turning it into a greater beauty, to say, at least let me try to share, as a gardener would, a greater beauty, because maybe that's the only thing we can do. Maybe history teaches that we're always in the middle of a dark night, but the dark night is something that we need to learn to navigate, a bit like sleep paralysis. You know, we have to find our way. And so, you know, much of my work, again, I say I use the oldest technology. I'm a cave painter. I use paint, imagination, and story. Because you want to give people back the opportunity to say, yeah, I don't like the story I'm telling about myself. You know, I don't like the story I'm telling about the world. Why do I look at the world and think it's all this and that and the other thing? Let me look close to home. Oh my God, I just looked into the eyes of my children. I don't want this world to end. I don't think it's going to end. I see too much optimism. Do you know, we start to recompose the world in a way we can live with. And then we become artists of consciousness rather than accountants that have a bottom line for everything and make us always feel lousy. Never enough.
I tell you, but you know, with all that you said, you know, one of the things that I keep being brought back to, just in general, is the beauty of being human. And I think that it can get so overlooked and overshadowed because especially now, because of so much fear. Yet
yeah.
People are afraid. This is the real interesting part about it, but people are afraid actually because they love being human.
Yeah.
They're actually afraid because they're afraid of not being human anymore, not existing. So I think it's really it really says something about, at the heart of it all, how precious life is to us and the human experience.
And history teaches, if we don't look at ourselves isolated, it begins with me and it ends with me. But wait a minute, I'm started this long wave then we look at it as seasons, as cycles, and we begin to trust that. And this is what's happened here in the discussion groups and the art, is that it's as if saying the things that really matter now have to be protected by those who care about it, meaning you are a guardian of what you love. And that the truth is that if we think about it a bit like the tree, but also one of the great metaphors that's come from this work is this relationship of the bud and the blossom, or the closed fist and the open hand. And that to survive, to get through these last thousands of years, we've had to have a closed fist. What are you for? What are you against? And we've held on. You think of that great contraction, that grasping, that I'm not going to let go. I'm not going to go crazy. And then this, because of the energy within, starts to no longer be able to be contained by this closed fist like the bud. It starts to energize. And as that does, it starts to push against, which feels to the bud like it's going crazy. But then there's finally, in a way, through the craziness, it starts to unfold. And as it does, it starts to not destroy its infrastructure, but shift its energy. And begin to realize, oh, it wasn't just to suffer and in a sense get through, but why do we suffer? And not just myself, why in the history of humankind have we suffered so? And as Joseph Campbell said, and why haven't we quit? You see it, that's our heroism.
Yeah,
we
love
like
the game
too.
knows,
yeah, and it finally says maybe the purpose isn't evolution as an endless getting nowhere in a meaningless forever, but like a season of being. We literally do blossom. And maybe the things we love about history when we are surrounded by the ennobling elements is we see the blossoms. We see that we, out of this darkness, cultivate great beauty. And I cannot think of what would define a more remarkably heroic race of beings than the ones that said, I will go into absolute not knowing. I will forget everything. I will be crushed by despair. And yet I will not quit. Something in me will, yeah. I mean, why does everyone weep? When you hear "Still I Rise," it's like, oh, gee, yeah, of course. Yeah. That's the human soul. And we can dismiss and say, oh, it's not this or that, but everything that transforms us is never true or false. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mozart isn't true or false. Love isn't true or false. The meaningful things are never true and false. And that's why in a way, we're suffering at a time. And I think that, you talk about the current moment, it's as if everything is forcing individuals to say, how do I not go crazy? Mm-hmm. How can I shift my attention? Because I used to distract myself, and there's so many things I can binge watch, only so much popcorn I can eat before I realize that maybe my inner agony is that I'm always distracting myself. I'm trying to get away from me. And it's almost as though if we don't look at it as good guy, bad guy, but really a living theater, we're sort of a great experiment where these pressures come and they say, this is archetype. You can no longer do what you once did. And you can keep fighting to do it the way you once did. But again, if you're a bud turning into a blossom, it's going to hurt seemingly. But think about birth. This is a very pain-filled, remarkable moment. And why do we leave the womb? It's because it becomes toxic. We can no longer stay in that condition. But we're not born into death. We're born into a new relationship. And it seems to me that's why the birth canal, so to speak, is the creative aspects of the human psyche that say, I will put this story together in a way I can live with. I will not simply study the piano. I'll realize its purpose is to create music. So let me take this structure and trust it. And maybe that's why people are being forced to have to ask all of these questions that there are no easy answers for, because you're forced back to say, well, it feels this way for me. And maybe that's the beginning of moving from a parental-child relationship with the psyche of reward and discipline into a time of, I don't really know, but I have to ask different questions, and I have to begin from where I live,
Yes.
and I have to begin from where I love. Mm-hmm. I wanted to include my children. I want to include my wife, my husband. I wanted to include, mm-hmm. like saying, I don't want to leave, aliens, great. I don't want to go away.
Mhm.
You know, I don't think there's more in the greater elsewhere. If we don't bring it here, it's irrelevant.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. A very, very good point. Because I think that, yes, you use the word distraction. I think as human beings, we are used to distracting ourselves away from ourselves
Yes.
because there is so much within ourselves. We are such a portal, black hole, this bottomless experience that I think we get afraid of ourselves. We become very afraid of ourselves. So, and I knew people who were like that. They weren't happy with just being by themselves. So they'd always have to have a lot of people at the house
Yeah.
because it's distracting. And I like this quote, and I tell this quote all the time because I love it so much. But I was watching a TED talk once, and ever since I heard this guy say that, I say it all the time. And he says the mind is like a bad neighborhood, and nobody wants to go there alone. Just love that quote because it's true.
Yeah. No, yeah, as I say, those who wish for genius must expect a lot of uninvited visitors.
There's so much
Yeah.
going on. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah. And everywhere you go, there you are. So it
Yeah.
makes it tough. But and I like the tree, the analogy of the tree, the sturdiness of the tree. And I think again, this is really important for folks to really just really recognize that anchoring, because the tree, it just branches out at the roots. And the group, because we're very group mind think, but I think the group is only as strong as each person in the group. So I think if we recognize the strength of yourself as the individual, the group is just going to be stronger.
You know, that's one of the things in discussion, because it's always been a round table, and essentially because of theater, being an actor, I've always been interested in the play and realized that my character isn't your character, and I have no right to tell you, well, you know what, your character should be like, more like my character. No, that's not how it is, because the play is the thing. And this is why I think of jazz. I love jazz. I love musicians. I love those that say, man, I love your genius. You know, I'm going to play the guitar, you play the saxophone. Let's jam, let's riff. And that's what about my art, so many of the things that have come through me is this idea of the riff, meaning not knowing and trusting. It's why I think the best way of exploring an idea is a bit like scene work with actors, where you're actually examining the greater vitality of the thing itself. And if it's good, you're both lifted and you both go places you would not expect. I mean, that's why so much of this, the tools of inquiry, we're so used to having classes and having a teacher and having, a lot of my work, and I know yours is to unteach, to unlearn, to let go of this. There's something more to learn. I mean, the whole metaphor here of the library is that we've created a library, that this is our DNA. We have existed and asked questions. We have become the questions we've asked, and from this created an enormous catalog, both as a library, but also as a genetic library. And this is very important because, in a way, it is a critical moment that is asking us a question, going back to when I wrote Adam Reborn and Eve Restored, a romance in two parts, which flowed through me as I painted Eve, which is for another conversation. But why it was important was one of the parts that stuck with me was that it was about being entertained into submission, meaning this loss of self through a type of diminution. And part of the thing of having to face the silence, face the dark city, so to speak, inside of the psyche, is that we begin to realize only by doing so that we've been afraid of shadows, because we've been looking at ourselves in a grand way rather than a type of intimate way. And this is why, again, I think that when we start to see ourselves as operating systems, holograms, that we contain the whole. So you are not incomplete. Everything here, which began with Kuan Yin, the Chinese mother goddess, and the inner dialogue was about that you are whole, holy, and holographic, meaning that we are the outcome. We wear the weave of the outcome of a great and most impossible journey, but we have finally come full circle. This is in symbolism. Everybody says the Ouroboros, the snake swallowing its own tail. What does that mean? And it's the idea that evolution isn't a line going somewhere. It's a curve that finally comes back, realizing that, and we look at our religions, we began with as ancient Egyptians and Atlanteans, all of these stories of our connection to the stars and the gods. So it was about a hierophantic caste. It wasn't about being human. And only when we really have the fall of the obelisk and Moses and then Jesus, all of this story that takes us on a journey into the horizontal, into time, into the hope that maybe down the road there will be salvation. But little did we know that we were developing an ego, meaning that this I, thou came from a sense of separation from what we once knew directly. This is why a lot of indigenous people are so beautiful now, because they're saying we never forgot. You know, there's healing here. The earth is your mother. And we're going, no, it's just rocks. Thank you very much. You know, because one leads to responsibility, the other to, again, a type of distraction. And I think we're being forced to pay attention. And I think for a good reason, because I think like the fire reaching here, the ocean is right out there. There was no further for the fire to burn. And it was 2 years from the election. Of the former president. And I realized that everyone was so angry. Neighbor wasn't watching out for neighbor. Neighbor hated what neighbor was doing. And the fire was angry at us, is the only way I could put it. Like it was an ancient spirit wanting to devour the truth that we had become so small and that what we thought we were protecting had made us so little. You know, in really that sense of at least in your home, plant a garden. Don't prove anything to the world. Prove it to yourself. And do it because it's a relationship you're finally willing to have. And I always say, because when I do an art class, I say, close the door. You know, if you discover the genius of a character you're playing, you do it not because you did it publicly. You did it in rehearsal. You did it with people you trusted. You could go places you couldn't imagine because you knew you felt safe. And I think we live in a time where everyone feels endangered. So the question is, where do I feel safe? Where can I close the door and say, at least here, let me have a relationship with the cosmos to say thank you. I don't know why everyone seems crazy now, but it's not going to make me crazy because otherwise it's me shouting in an insane asylum. What's the point? You know, if you realize the guy really does think he's Napoleon, he's Napoleon. Move along.
I love it. I love it. And I am really ready to ask him about the hieroglyph of the human soul, the beginning of that, which started on 9/11 in 01, and what that felt like being just starting, not knowing that you were going to start something. You have no idea. You just sort of started. What was that like?
You know, I almost now, it's funny looking back, I could almost make it an opera in a way, because I think everyone that was alive then, it was a gut punch. It was a blow of, I had never felt so profoundly hated. Do you know that the energy was, I want you to die.
Yeah.
Not, we're going to talk about this, I want you to die. And in that moment, I did. I fell on the floor. I really just felt this sense of collapse, like the towers. This realization, and because of my, I think just my love of history and this, I realized that what was happening was, and I heard, now it begins inwardly. And it was not described. You know, I didn't. Well, what is it? But I fell on my knees on my studio floor, on the linoleum floor, and really feeling It was about the story we're telling. You know, there was, if I likened it, it was almost like working on the scaffolding in the Sistine Chapel and your arguments about God and the Pope, and, you know, in a sense, this grand scheme of things on the scaffolding. And on that day, that grand conceit fell off the scaffolding. And I was on my knees in a ranch-style house on linoleum floor. You know, in other words, it was falling from the grand abstraction, these great towers, to this absolute, well, what do we do now? You know, we don't have these great vaulted beliefs. And I started to later on, but see the story in my own work that my world archetype, which has twin pillars in it, is dated 9/11/1986. So it was 15 years to the day. So this sense that the art, the creative qualities of sentience aren't really in time in the way we think of it, but more in condition. And that as I fell on my knees onto the floor, I had my pen and my ink, and I started again like a jazz movement. I wasn't trying to do anything. I just had to make a mark. But as I did, it became what is a watcher, meaning a type of repeating figure over and over and over again, which I would liken to if you were charting music. So it became like liquid music. And as I followed this rhythm, Kuan Yin, the Chinese mother goddess, was the first entity or quality to form. So she was rising up through the linoleum floor, being drawn forth quite literally through my hand in this time of anguish, essentially, because I realized that it was a collective trauma. What do we do now? To some, it was the call to defend and go. To others, it was to find out who was at fault. For others, do you know that? But for me, it was the truth that it had happened. Do you know? And it did. It triggered. And I heard inwardly, I heard, this is the hieroglyph of the human soul. And because we're not even, we don't use words like soul or hieroglyph in our culture. Hieroglyph is essentially the picture book. And soul, meaning how do we make sense of this? What does it mean to be human? In a sense, the shared soul of all of us, because each of us are living a different, say, variation of that question. What does it mean to be human? And when we understand that, then every life, every book in the library takes on its own fullness because it's coming from that center, but it's the same question. I'm asking, what does it mean to be human? And so that's why this started me on an adventure that I still work on in this hieroglyph of the human soul every day for the last 20 years, because it's the story that is beginning to reveal an enormous key, that the last flood was water. This flood is information. So the question is, how do we navigate the mental waters? Not the waters that wet hands, but the waters of the mind, meaning what do I pay attention to? And so in this home where people like you, like ourselves, that have said, let this matter to me, even if it doesn't seem to matter to the world, it matters to me. So let me be the custodian of that. And I started to realize that, because it told me, I mean, it's very interesting, because when I say it told me, I want to also clarify that as an actor, you learn to listen to your inner voice. You learn that no one can create a character for you. So you start to allow that other quality to say, well, what about this? And you do have inner conversations. And I found the richness of my inner conversations in my work on the tarot and archetype allowed me to truly enter into the dynamic character of the psyche. And then with 9/11, that as the hieroglyph of the human soul unfolded, a dear friend, Don Esty, so I think you know, Don said, who works with virtual reality and multidimensionality, he said, have you looked at this with 3D glasses? And I hadn't. And I put on 3D glasses, chroma depth glasses. And not only had this story been being told on my floor, that with 3D glasses, it was suddenly multidimensional. So we're within a multidimensional fixed environment that is essentially a cave painting. So it means we're going back to the beginning. We're going back to, well, what was our first technology? Paint. and a cave, meaning, and what was it about? I don't know. I keep being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, and I really want to find out why. And then the saber-tooth doesn't show up and tell you why. So you realize as the storyteller, listen, maybe I am just making this up, but I've got these little kids now. They're being chased by the saber-toothed tiger too. So let me at least create context. You know, and we start to tell stories to get us through the night. And this is very important for this work here, because once we knew the great fires of connection, but ours was not that. The journey here of the Adam and Eve story is that we finally become human. And to do so, we disconnect from the goddess. We disconnect from direct knowing. We create that good old right angle, meaning that as we turn toward thought, we turn away from love only to take the great journey of self-reflection and turn back and realize finally we can embrace the story of where we come from. And this is where it's very interesting in the hieroglyph, the mother shows up. You know, she really does, she shows up and says, yeah, I love all of my children. As a matter of fact, in this narrative, she says, I'm the knowledge of your atoms. There are no evil atoms. If you don't like your stories, tell better stories. Begin with the story you tell yourself about who you think you are. I love you. Think about that. I mean, to me, that's a much better, yeah, and it's a much better place to start a sense of self-examination. Am I really as dreadful and loathsome as I believe I am? Because we're all dealing with, as I say, we have the you know, we live, so we're livers. So essentially, what does a liver do? It detoxifies. So I think part of what we're trying to do is not,
livers.
We're livers. We don't get out of it. We detoxify it by taking meaninglessness and cultivating meaning. And maybe that's the human gift. Meaning things are, to a great degree, so-called random. But there's also synchronicity or synchronicity. The sense of what I call, I'm not going to argue with about God, but I do know there's the grand choreographer. Meaning I always feel and hear inwardly, it's much better written than we think. And that humans try way too hard. It's not supposed to be this difficult. You start thinking, yeah, why have I been agreeing to agree with the things that chain me to despair? Why haven't I examined, not in front of others or on Facebook or on Zoom or whatever, but alone? Why am I agreeing to agree that this version of who I am and what I think the world is healthy or valuable? And I don't need to get metaphysical. I don't need to get, I can just ask that as a gardener. What am I cultivating? What am I spending my time with? And because we don't get, I don't care if you believe in reincarnation, you're not coming back. If you're your Uncle Tim now, well, you don't remember being your Uncle Tim, so you don't get a second chance at the consciousness that you are, the painting, the version of who you are. And when my dad died, it was the most extraordinary thing, because I saw his book of life being as if the book had fallen into the waters, and that as he was dying, the book was being lifted and the book was being squeezed and the waters were returning to the waters, and that the words had gone all over. But now that he was leaving, almost like a character in a play, well, his interpretation of Joseph was different than another's, but he was done. And his book was placed lovingly on a shelf. I saw it with the words, but now it's been lived. And I almost felt like Scrooge after the third night. And I thought, oh, geez. Oh my God, you have no idea the reverence another level of consciousness has for you, that you were willing to take this impossible challenge of what does it mean to be human, to never have the keys to getting out of it, only the possibility of getting through it. I mean, my God, we've got to give ourselves, I really feel like if we just honored a bit more of the difficulty that to be human brings, we'd stop fighting over the shallows, you know, and start honoring the depths. And my motto is, and for me, at least here, this is how I live. You know, I don't say you must, but you know, that was my great revelation with 9/11 too, was some part of me quit. I said, if this is the best, whatever they means can do, I can tell a better story. And I have to say now, I do believe the hieroglyph of the human soul, which inadvertently turned out with to make the acronym THOTHS, which goes back to ancient Egypt, and the phoenix, which is this painting of mine. So there's all this story of a greater musicality now to our story. And I do feel that a lot of what has been attracted here, a lot of the people have been a lot of broken-hearted beings, meaning that they ran out into a world where they thought that the things that mattered most to them would matter to others, and they discovered it didn't matter to others. And a matter of fact, if they spoke too much or too often, they often were rejected by others and made to feel bad. So they learned the best course was to remain silent. And I see this not just in our time, I see this really across time, about, well, what is it that, where do I begin? And I really do. I think that it is begin. I begin here. And there's nothing wrong with who I am or what I've done or where I'm going. I am a character in a play. What is the character that is most myself? What day do I wake up and go, you know what? I like this me. We know. I mean, this is the thing. We distract ourselves and say, oh, I don't know. I need to go to talk to somebody. No,
Yeah, it's just owning that.
Yeah.
You just owning that. And of course, you have those days. I think just any moment at all, any day that you wake up, and in that moment, or you get up and you go and look in the mirror, because we get them, there are those days where today you're just like not that beautiful to yourself that day. I think it's just all okay. And then there's some days you get up and you're like, oh my God, I would go out with you today. I would absolutely date you today. You're just looking so incredible. So I think it's just mishmash of emotions and feelings and variety of reality that we experience. And your work, when you look at it, what I found fascinating was truly the symbology of the layers and layers that are embedded into layers and layers. Look very closely at your work, and you think you see a face, and then you look closer, and then there are all these worlds that are inside of other worlds. And to me, I found that fascinating, because that's what we live. The space that I'm sitting in right now, how many multiple layers of possible realities are in this moment right now. And that's what your work, looking at it, that's what it reminds me of.
That's beautiful, because I think that especially now, it's as a circulatory system, that it is about this interconnectivity, that everything has this greater vibrant relationship, and that you can, it is intriguing, because again, I never set out to be original or figure out a clever way to do any of this. Rather, I feel more like a happy archaeologist that goes, I kept digging. I feel like that's what my tarot was. I simply realized there was a chamber that was deeper than the floor what they had gotten to. And it wasn't to dismiss the upper floors. It was to say, wait a minute, there's a greater depth here. Let's descend. Let's go, and that in a way also is what then sets up this relationship to the paintings. And as you say, the worlds within worlds. I did a piece called Parios Mundos Intus Mundos, which is I bring forth worlds within worlds. And I think that you're really right about that. It's this relationship, and it was actually Nassim Haramein, the physicist, and I love what he said. He said that we are the event horizon, between the quantum and the relative. And I thought that really helps us understand this relationship of pattern. If I can find the primary pattern, myself, source, then I can see it in a sense in the larger, and I can also see it in the infinitely small. And it allows me, and this is why a lot of, even in the design of some of my tarot work, you'll see this figure eight, this working of qualities of connecting above and below, because this is what, or side to side, in and out, because this is what allows something to, find a spherical quality, not just a linear quality. And that's what in a way my hand has done, because the questions I've asked have mentored me. And so it's taken me into worlds within worlds, and almost to express the truth that we can't go to multidimensionality. We have a three-dimensional instrument. But our mind, the qualities of imagination, can. And this is what the ancient sites taught us, why they were made of stone, why they were fixed, was that we wanted to create a bit like the theater of mind, where we could all concentrate and not go, but draw forth, so that by drawing forth the greater knowing, it would come through ourselves as a filter and be expressed outwardly. Do you know, we've inverted it. We think we have to go somewhere to get something.
Right. Everything
Yeah.
is here. Everything is, there
Yeah.
is no here nor there, as they say. We've got like 3 minutes left because it went by so quickly. First of all, we need to know how do we get a hold of your work? In what way can people engage with your work?
A couple of ways. My website is leighmccloskey.com, and there are connections and links. I'm also a Leigh McCloskey YouTube channel, and what I've tried to do, as with what you're doing, Sonia, in a different way, but to create, like, I really love the idea of cultivating conversation, and a lot of it is, well, what questions are we asking? So I did a food for thought series where I take just a question and examine it, sort of turn the diamond, so to speak, and then been also doing stories of the art and of the archetypes of my Codex Tour work, which was what actually with Flying Lotus on his Cosmogramma album, and so I would look at leighmccloskey.com, Google Leigh McCloskey art or archetype tarot, the Tarot Revisioned, which is the name of my book, I just look around in a way.
They will be all listed. I'll put them all on your profile, so all the links will be there on your profile for people to engage, and also the video.
And if you reach out, I will try and get back to you. And if you reach out, I will try and get back to you if you have questions or anything, because we've been, until the pandemic, we were always inviting people. I was always doing tours here, because the best way, like a walkabout, is to be immersive, to really enjoy the theater of it, because it is meant to be experiential as well as
absolutely
something to do. Yeah, so and we will be back up, there will be a time, so we can all stay in touch, and would love to share it with you, and and have a good conversation.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Leigh. It was such a pleasure chatting with you, and of course, as you know, we can chat for hours, and those hours seem like a minute.
Melt away. Yes,
because there's so much to chat about. So thank you once again, and thank you to our listening audience. Make sure that you visit the expansionzone.com for the archive of this show and all other shows, and also the YouTube channel, as this will be available on YouTube as the video as well. And to find out more about me, do visit therealsoniabarrett.com. And as always, I like to remind you to live life to its fullest and question everything. Until next time, see you then.